Lily Thompson had always thought of herself as an ordinary person, living an unremarkable life in a small town where everyone knew everyone else's business. She worked as a librarian at the local library, a job that was quiet and peaceful, exactly how she liked it. Her daily routine rarely changed. Wake up early, get ready, catch the bus to work, and sip on coffee while reading a book or chatting with her coworkers. The town was small enough that everyone knew each other, and while Lily had friends, she always felt more comfortable in the background, observing rather than engaging. That morning started no differently than any other. Lily had planned a trip to visit her cousin Claire in the city, a quick getaway to break up the monotony of her routine. She had been saving up for months to buy a new phone, something that would make her life a little easier, a little more connected. The excitement of having the latest iPhone made her feel like she was finally treating herself, like she was deserving of something nice for once. It wasn't a huge thing, but it was her thing, a symbol of a small victory in her otherwise predictable life. When she boarded the plane that afternoon, everything felt normal. The flight was a short one, just under 2 hours, so she didn't expect any major complications. She settled into her seat by the window, tucked her bag under the seat in front of her, and pulled out her new iPhone to fiddle with it, checking messages, scrolling through social media. She was just getting the hang of the new interface when a voice interrupted her focus. "Excuse me, do you mind if I sit here?" a woman asked, with an air of entitlement that was unmistakable. Lily looked up to see a tall woman, probably in her mid-40s, standing in the aisle with a scowl on her face. Her perfectly styled hair and expensive-looking clothes screamed high maintenance. "Ah, no. Go ahead," Lily replied, shifting her bag to make space. The woman slid into the seat next to her, muttering something under her breath about how crowded the flight was. The woman immediately began making small talk, and while Lily wasn't particularly interested in chatting, she responded politely. The woman introduced herself as Karen, which only seemed to fit her personality. She immediately began discussing her upcoming business trip, how stressful it had been to get everything organized, and how she had to sit next to a commoner like Lily. Karen went on about her expensive travels, her high-powered job, and the places she had been, her stories designed to show off, to remind Lily that her life was nothing like Karen's. Lily tried to focus on her phone, hoping to avoid further conversation. She wasn't the type to engage with people like Karen, who oozed entitlement, but Karen wasn't one to let silence go unchallenged. As the plane took off, Karen kept talking, her voice growing louder as she complained about everything from the food to the cramped seats. Lily barely paid attention, trying to block out the sound of her voice, but then Karen's words shifted to something more alarming. "That's a nice phone," Karen remarked, eyeing Lily's new iPhone. Lily smiled politely and nodded, not wanting to get involved in a discussion about it. But Karen wasn't letting it go. "You know," Karen continued, "I've been thinking of getting one of these, but they're just so overpriced. I mean, who needs all these features? Seems like a waste of money if you ask me." Lily shifted in her seat, trying to ignore Karen's unsolicited judgment. The truth was, Lily had been so excited to buy the iPhone. It was her small indulgence, something to make her feel a little more connected to the world. But Karen didn't let her off that easily. "You don't even seem like the type who'd really use all that technology. Honestly, you're probably better off just getting a cheap phone. That way, you wouldn't have to worry about it breaking or getting lost." Lily felt the heat rise to her cheeks, but she kept her calm. She wasn't about to let Karen get under her skin, not in this tiny cramped space on a plane with nowhere to go. Karen was still going on about the phone, dismissing it as unnecessary, when Lily noticed something that made her stomach turn. Karen's eyes were fixed on the phone in her hands. She was staring at it like it was the most fascinating thing in the world. Lily's grip on the phone tightened instinctively. The moment passed quickly, and Lily thought perhaps she was just being paranoid. But as she glanced out the window, she caught a flash of movement in her peripheral vision. Karen's hand reached out, slowly but deliberately, toward her iPhone. At first, it seemed like a mistake, a hand brushing against her belongings. But before Lily could react, Karen's fingers wrapped around the phone, yanking it from her grasp in one swift motion. Lily froze. Her mind raced to catch up with what had just happened. Karen had taken her phone, not asked for it, not complimented it, and then given it back. No, she had outright stolen it. Without a word, Karen clutched the phone to her chest and leaned back in her seat as if she had just claimed some great prize. "Excuse me," Lily said, her voice trembling as she turned to face Karen. "That's my phone. Give it back." Karen looked at her with a blank expression, as though she didn't even understand what the problem was. "Oh, I'm sorry. Did you need this?" she asked, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "I thought it was mine. You can't expect me to just let it sit there unused." Lily felt the blood drain from her face. She was in shock. How was this even happening? She had never been in a situation like this before. She had read about things like this in the news. Outrageous public thefts, people getting scammed or robbed. But this was real, happening to her. Her hands trembled as she reached out for the phone, but Karen yanked it out of her reach. "I don't know what you're talking about," Karen said dismissively, her tone cold and uninterested. "Maybe you left it here, but it's definitely mine now. You can just forget about it." Lily's mind was spinning. She didn't know what to do. She didn't want to make a scene, didn't want to risk causing a confrontation that could escalate further. But at the same time, how could she just let this woman take something that belonged to her? The phone was expensive. It wasn't just a piece of technology. It was a part of her. And yet here was Karen, acting as though it were nothing. For a few moments, Lily remained frozen, unsure of her next move. Her chest tightened as the realization hit her. This was happening. The situation was real. And it wasn't going away anytime soon. Lily's heart pounded in her chest as she stared at Karen, whose smug expression only seemed to grow with each passing second. The reality of what had just happened hit her like a ton of bricks. Her new iPhone, the one she had saved up for months to buy, was now in the hands of a woman who clearly felt entitled to it. For a moment, Lily couldn't even process what to do next. She opened her mouth to speak, but words failed her. How was it possible that this was happening? This was her phone, her hard-earned possession. And yet, it was no longer hers. The flight attendants hadn't even passed by yet, and the plane was still a good distance from its destination. She shifted uncomfortably in her seat, glancing at the other passengers around her. Some were already pretending to ignore the situation, clearly too uncomfortable to get involved. A few glanced over their shoulders, but no one made a move to intervene. Lily could feel her face flush with a mixture of embarrassment and rising anger. Was this really how it was going to go? Would everyone just let Karen get away with this? Would she be forced to sit silently and let the woman keep the phone? Lily took a deep breath, willing herself to stay calm. She had never been one for confrontation, always the type to avoid conflict. But this was different. This was personal. This wasn't just about the phone. It was about standing up for herself, about not letting someone like Karen walk all over her. She gathered her courage, squaring her shoulders as she fixed her gaze on Karen, who was now scrolling through the phone like it was her own. "That's my phone," Lily repeated, this time with more authority in her voice. "I've only had it for a few days. Please give it back." Karen didn't even look up. "You don't need it. It's not like you're actually using it," she muttered dismissively, continuing to swipe through Lily's phone as though it were some insignificant object. The cold, dismissive tone in Karen's voice only fueled the fire inside Lily. The audacity of this woman was staggering. Lily felt a surge of anger rise in her chest, but she knew she had to keep it together. She wasn't going to let Karen bully her into silence. "You're stealing it," Lily said firmly, her voice trembling only slightly. "I want my phone back now." Karen finally looked up, her face a picture of exaggerated disbelief. "Stealing? Are you serious? You're the one acting like this is some big deal. It's just a phone, Liddy. Get over it. Lily felt a rush of frustration. It was as if Karen was treating the theft like it was a joke. How could anyone be so cold, so indifferent to someone else's property? Lily was taken aback by how easily Karen was brushing her off. But she wasn't about to let this go. She couldn't. The phone represented more than just a piece of technology. It was a symbol of the one thing Lily had worked hard for, something she could call her own in a world that often made her feel invisible. And now it was slipping away, piece by piece, as Karen's hands slid effortlessly over it, claiming it as hers. Give it back, Lily demanded again, her voice rising, drawing the attention of a few more passengers. She could feel their eyes on her, and though part of her wanted to crawl under the seat and disappear, she knew this moment was crucial. She couldn't back down. Not now. Karen rolled her eyes, a smirk playing at the corners of her mouth. You're really going to make a scene over this? You must be really pathetic if this is how you're going to act over something so trivial. Lily's hands clenched into fists, but she fought to remain calm. I'm not making a scene. You're the one who took my phone. That's theft. And I'm not going to let you get away with it. The tension in the air seemed to grow thicker as Karen's expression shifted from casual dismissal to something more irritated, but still unconcerned. You really don't know how this works, do you? She sneered. I'm a frequent flyer. I'm sure they'll back me up if I tell them you're harassing me. You've got no proof this phone is yours. The words hit Lily like a punch to the gut. What could she do? It was her word against Karen's, and Lily had no proof that the phone was hers beyond her word. She hadn't registered it yet, hadn't put any special markings on it. It was a brand new device, just like any other. What if Karen was right? What if the authorities sided with her, and Lily was left empty-handed, humiliated, and unheard? Lily's mind raced, but she refused to let doubt take over. She had to act. She couldn't just sit there and let this woman get away with it. I'm not going to let this go, Lily said, her voice resolute, even if it wavered slightly from the fear creeping into her chest. I'll get the flight attendants. I'll get the police. You'll have to give it back. Karen smirked again, as if Lily were a child throwing a tantrum. Go ahead. See where that gets you. No one will believe you. The minutes that followed were some of the most agonizing of Lily's life. Every second felt like an eternity as she waited for the flight attendants to make their way down the aisle. She tried to steady her breath, but the adrenaline coursing through her made her heart race. She couldn't understand how someone could be so shameless. It was like Karen was daring her to do something about it, as if Lily's discomfort and hesitation were exactly what Karen wanted. Finally, a flight attendant approached, her face a mask of professionalism, but Lily could see the uncertainty in her eyes as she glanced between the two women. She explained the situation briefly, doing her best to stay calm, but it was clear that the flight attendant was caught in the middle of an uncomfortable situation. Karen immediately launched into her version of the story, spinning a web of lies about how Lily had been causing a disturbance and how she had mistakenly grabbed the wrong phone. This woman is harassing me, Karen said with a wide-eyed, innocent expression. She's trying to accuse me of taking something that isn't hers. I don't know what her problem is, but I just want to enjoy my flight in peace. Lily's stomach dropped. Karen was so smooth, so convincing. She looked every part the victim. And for a moment, Lily wondered if anyone would believe her. The flight attendant hesitated, unsure of what to do. But Lily knew she had to keep pushing. I'm telling you, that's my phone, Lily repeated, her voice firm. For a moment, there was silence. The tension in the air was palpable, thick enough that even the other passengers seemed to hold their breath. Lily couldn't help but wonder how this would end. Would she get her phone back? Or was she going to be made to feel like the one at fault? Everything was in limbo, hanging in the balance. And the longer the silence stretched on, the more Lily realized one undeniable truth. This wasn't just about the phone anymore. This was about standing her ground, about proving she wasn't going to be pushed around by someone like Karen. The silence between Lily and Karen hung thick in the air, as if the world had paused to watch what would happen next. The flight attendant glanced back and forth between the two women, clearly unsure of what to do. The tension was palpable, and Lily could feel the eyes of the surrounding passengers boring into her, some sympathetic, others indifferent. It felt like the whole plane had become a stage for this bizarre drama. The flight attendant finally spoke, her voice calm but firm. "Let me take both of you to the front and see if we can sort this out." Lily could barely hide her frustration as she stood, her legs feeling weak beneath her. She had never been in a confrontation like this before. This was beyond anything she had ever imagined for her quiet, uneventful life. The walk to the front of the plane felt endless, the stares from the other passengers like invisible weight pressing on her shoulders. At the front, the flight attendant handed them over to a lead stewardess, a tall woman with an efficient air about her. She asked each of them to explain what had happened, and Lily, despite her growing anxiety, recounted the details as clearly as she could. She emphasized that the phone had been in her possession the entire time before Karen had snatched it. Karen, of course, spun a different version of the story, claiming she had mistaken the phone for her own, acting entirely calm and composed, a stark contrast to Lily's evident distress. Lily could see how it was unfolding. Karen was playing the victim, and Lily was the hysterical woman making accusations. She had to admit, if she were an outsider watching this scene unfold, it would be hard to believe her side. The flight attendants, although polite, seemed increasingly uncomfortable. One of them asked Lily, "Do you have any way to prove the phone is yours? A serial number, perhaps?" Lily's heart sank. She hadn't registered the phone yet. It was brand new, and she had been so excited to use it that she hadn't taken the time to set up the usual security features like her Apple ID or marking it with her name. It was a plain, unmarked device, just like any other. She knew she was at a disadvantage now. Karen, on the other hand, seemed to have it all under control. Lily wanted to scream, but she clenched her fists instead, trying to keep her composure. "I know it's mine," she said, her voice trembling but determined. "I bought it brand new, and I've only had it for a few days. It's my phone." Karen scoffed. "You're making a big deal out of nothing. It's just a phone. Get over it." She said this with such coldness that it sent a chill through Lily. How could someone be so detached from the reality of what they were doing? Karen wasn't just stealing a phone. She was dismissing Lily's feelings, invalidating her experience. It was more than just the phone. It was about respect, about dignity, and Lily felt every inch of that injustice. The flight attendants conferred for a moment, looking at each other, then back at the two women. The tension was almost unbearable as they decided what to do next. "We'll have to hold on to both of your details and report this incident to airport security once we land," the lead stewardess said, trying to sound professional, but her voice betraying an edge of uncertainty. Lily nodded, her throat dry. At least the phone would be returned to her once they landed, she thought. But even then, a gnawing fear set in. What if the police sided with Karen? What if this was going to turn into an even bigger mess? Her mind raced with possibilities. She was in a nightmare she couldn't wake up from, a situation she had never prepared for, never even imagined. As the flight continued, Lily couldn't help but replay the events in her mind. She had done everything right. She had asked politely, she had stayed calm, and she had tried to handle the situation without causing a scene. But Karen's actions, her sense of entitlement, and the way she made Lily feel small were beyond anything Lily could have expected. Every few minutes, Karen would glance over at her with that same smug expression, as if she were the one in control, as if she had already won. Lily's thoughts were interrupted when the captain's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be landing shortly. Please make sure your seatbelts are fastened and your tray tables are stowed." The announcement, routine as it was, felt like a punctuation mark in Lily's emotional chaos. The flight wasn't even over yet, and already She felt like her world had been turned upside down. She had never imagined that a simple trip to visit family would end up in this kind of turmoil. But there it was. Her entire day was ruined by one woman's sense of superiority, and the realization that Lily, in her quiet and unassuming way, had never expected to have to fight for something that belonged to her. The rest of the flight passed in a blur. Karen made a few more cutting remarks, but Lily no longer cared to listen. The small part of her that had once hoped Karen would have some semblance of decency had vanished, replaced by the cold understanding that she was dealing with someone who didn't care about right or wrong, who only cared about getting what she wanted and walking all over anyone in her path. As the plane began its descent, Lily's nerves started to settle. There was nothing more she could do now except wait for the landing. But even then, her mind kept spinning. She thought about her next steps. What would happen when the plane touched down? What if airport security sided with Karen? What if, after all this, Lily ended up being the one punished for trying to retrieve her own property? The plane finally touched down, the wheels of the aircraft scraping against the tarmac. It was as if the jolt of landing gave Lily's body permission to release the tension she had been holding for hours. She stood as the plane taxied to the gate, her legs stiff from sitting for so long, but her mind was still racing. The door opened, and passengers began to gather their belongings, murmuring amongst themselves as they prepared to disembark. Lily stood, watching Karen as she pulled her bag from the overhead compartment and turned toward the door without a single glance in her direction. Lily felt a sense of determination surge within her. This wasn't over. No matter what happened next, she wasn't going to let Karen walk away unscathed. The phone, yes, it was important to her, but this was about standing up for herself, for the right to not be trampled by someone like Karen. As she stepped off the plane, Lily took a deep breath. She wasn't sure what would happen, but she knew one thing for sure: this fight wasn't over. She was going to get her phone back, and if nothing else, she was going to make sure that Karen didn't walk away feeling like she had won. The moment Lily stepped off the plane, the knot in her stomach tightened. She could hear the hum of the airport all around her. The sound of wheels on the linoleum floor, the distant announcements echoing through the terminal. But all she could focus on was the looming confrontation. As the passengers filed off, Lily followed them, the weight of the situation pressing down on her with every step. She kept her gaze fixed ahead, but every few moments her eyes would flicker back to Karen, who was a few steps ahead, gliding through the crowd as if nothing had happened. Lily's blood boiled. Karen was acting as if the last few hours of harassment and theft had been a figment of Lily's imagination. She was walking through this like it was a normal day, while Lily's nerves were on edge, her pulse quickening with each passing second. At the gate, they were approached by two uniformed airport security officers. Lily's heart skipped a beat. This was it, the moment she would finally get her phone back, or at least have the opportunity to explain what had happened. She took a deep breath, hoping that somehow the truth would win out. But as she approached, her mind raced with all the possibilities. What if the officers didn't believe her? What if they sided with Karen, or worse, dismissed her as just another emotional woman making a scene? Lily couldn't let that happen. She had to be calm, collected, and firm. This wasn't just about the phone. It was about standing up for herself, for the principle of it all. Karen was already talking to the officers, her voice loud and melodramatic. "This woman has been harassing me the entire flight," she was saying. "She accused me of stealing her phone, but I didn't take it. She's just jealous and wants to cause trouble." Karen's face was a picture of fox innocence, her eyes wide with exaggerated distress. She spoke in the kind of overly polite, but utterly insincere tone that made Lily's skin crawl. Lily felt a wave of frustration and anger rise up within her, but she knew she had to remain composed. She approached the officers, her voice steady, as she began recounting the details. "I've explained the situation to the flight attendants, but they said I need to speak to security. Karen took my phone while I was sitting next to her on the plane. I tried to get it back, but she refused. She's been lying about what happened. Karen interrupted her almost immediately, her voice laced with venom. Lies. I didn't take anything. This woman is just upset for no reason. She turned to the officers with a false, pleading expression. I don't know what her problem is, but she's just causing unnecessary trouble. I didn't steal anything from her. She's accusing me because she's upset I'm sitting next to her. Lily couldn't believe it. Karen was twisting everything, making her seem like the one who was in the wrong. The officers exchanged looks, clearly unsure of how to proceed. One officer, a middle-aged man with short hair and a no-nonsense demeanor, finally spoke. All right, let's take a look at the phone, he said, gesturing to Karen, who was still clutching the iPhone. We need to verify that it belongs to her. Lily watched with growing anxiety as Karen held the phone in her hands, clearly unwilling to part with it. Let's just check the serial number, the officer suggested. We'll be able to tell if it matches the details on the purchase receipt. Karen's face faltered for a split second, but then she quickly masked it with a practiced smile. I don't have the receipt. I'm afraid it's already registered to my name. Her tone was sweet but full of malice, and Lily could see she was getting desperate. Karen was trying to cover her tracks, but Lily knew the truth. She couldn't back down now. Lily glanced down at her own phone, but it didn't help her. The situation was a blur of confusion, and she still had no proof beyond her word. Karen had covered her bases by not keeping any physical evidence, and Lily had never thought she would need to photograph or record the serial number. Her stomach turned as she realized she was in a tight spot. The officers looked at each other, exchanging glances, as if debating what to do next. We'll need to take both of your details, one of the officers said. We'll have to report this to the local authorities, and if this escalates, they'll be able to assist you further. Lily nodded, trying to keep her emotions in check. She felt like she was losing control of the situation. It was all too surreal. What was supposed to be a quiet trip had spiraled into this chaotic mess. How had things gotten this far? What had started as a simple accusation had now turned into a potential legal dispute, and Lily wasn't sure how long she could hold on to her sanity. The officers took down their names, addresses, and contact information, while Karen remained annoyingly calm, almost smug, as if this was a routine inconvenience for her. Lily, on the other hand, felt like she was carrying the weight of the world. She had been hoping this would be resolved easily, that the phone would be returned to her with a simple apology from Karen, but it was clear now that nothing about this situation would be simple. When the officers had finished, they told both women to wait while they made a few calls. The tension in the air was unbearable, and Lily stood in silence, her hands trembling at her sides. Karen, in contrast, seemed entirely unfazed. She was scrolling through her own phone, pretending as if this whole ordeal had been nothing more than a minor inconvenience. Lily couldn't help but think about the toll this was taking on her. She had never been in a legal battle, never been forced to argue with someone like this. She had always been the type to avoid confrontation, to try to smooth things over rather than escalate any conflict. But now, here she was, standing in an airport, fighting for something that should have been hers from the beginning. She was frustrated, exhausted, and emotionally drained. But as much as she wanted to just walk away, she knew she couldn't. Karen was a thief. And if Lily didn't fight for what was rightfully hers, what would that say about her? She could already imagine the whispers if she just let it go, the she didn't even try to get it back kind of rumors that would follow her. This wasn't just about a phone. It was about her dignity, her sense of justice. She couldn't let Karen win. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the officers returned. One of them, the middle-aged man who had spoken earlier, spoke up. We've made contact with the airline and the local authorities. They've asked us to file a formal report on the incident. Lily's heart sank, but she stayed quiet, waiting for what would come next. We're going to have to take you both to the police station to file the report, the officer continued. It's standard procedure, and they'll handle the investigation from here. We need to ensure everything is documented properly. Lily nodded. She felt a wave of disbelief wash over her. It wasn't just about getting her phone back anymore. It was about this situation going public, about the legal ramifications that would now hang over both of them. This was turning into something much bigger than she had anticipated. As she followed the officers to the police station, Lily couldn't help but reflect on how this had started. A quiet, ordinary day that had been completely upended by one woman's entitlement. And now, there was no turning back. Whatever happened next would change everything, not just for her, but for the entire community. The drive to the police station was agonizingly slow, each minute stretching into what felt like an eternity. Lily sat in the back of the police cruiser, her hands clenched tightly in her lap, her mind racing with a million thoughts she couldn't seem to slow down. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Karen's smug face, saw her calmly holding the phone as if she had every right to it. The whole situation felt surreal, like something out of a nightmare she couldn't wake up from. She kept asking herself the same question over and over. How had it come to this? How had a simple interaction on a plane escalated into a full-blown legal battle? The police station was quiet when they arrived. The hum of fluorescent lights and the soft shuffle of feet on tile floors, the only sounds in the sterile, drab hallway. Lily followed the officers inside, her heart pounding with each step. She had never been inside a police station before, and the stark reality of it all sent a shiver down her spine. This wasn't the peaceful, uneventful life she had always known. This was a battle, one she wasn't sure she was prepared for. Karen, who had been eerily silent during the drive, still maintained that cold, confident demeanor, as though she was merely following a routine she was all too familiar with. She was on her phone now, her fingers flicking across the screen as though nothing out of the ordinary had happened. It was as if she were in her own little world, completely detached from the chaos she had caused. Lily couldn't understand it. How could someone be so calm in the face of such obvious wrongdoing? As they entered the holding area, Lily was led into a small, plain room with a metal table and 2 chairs. The officers instructed her to sit and wait for further instructions. She barely acknowledged the chair as she sank into it, her mind still spinning. The reality of the situation was starting to sink in. The police were involved now. This wasn't just a petty squabble over a phone anymore. It was a legal issue, something that could follow her around for months, if not longer. She thought about her job, her friends, her family. She had always kept to herself, avoiding drama and conflict, but now she was in the middle of something she couldn't control. Karen sat across from her, still texting on her phone as though everything was perfectly fine. Lily wanted to lash out, to yell at her for being so brazen, for acting as though she had done nothing wrong. But she knew she couldn't. She had to remain calm. She had to be smart. The police were watching, and she couldn't afford to lose control now. Minutes passed, and it felt like hours. Finally, one of the officers came in, a woman in her 30s with short, dark hair and a no-nonsense look about her. "All right," she said, her voice sharp and professional. "We're going to need to take both of your statements. After that, we'll determine the next steps." Lily nodded, her stomach churning. This was it. She had to get her story right. She had to explain what had happened without sounding like she was overreacting, without giving Karen any more ammunition to use against her. She tried to focus, to calm her racing thoughts, but all she could think about was how Karen's lies had already been planted in the minds of the officers. She could see it now, the way they would look at her, the way they would view her as the troublemaker, the one who was making a big deal out of nothing. And that terrified her. The officer instructed Lily to recount everything from the beginning. And so she did. She spoke clearly, explaining how Karen had approached her on the plane, how she had been polite at first, but then how things had taken a sharp turn when Karen had taken the phone. She described how Karen had initially denied taking it, how she had made false accusations about Lily being the one causing a disturbance, how she had refused to give the phone back. She explained the tension with the flight attendants, how the situation had escalated once they had landed, and how it had culminated in them being brought to the police station. As she spoke, Lily could feel her emotions rising. The anger, the frustration, the disbelief, it was all bubbling to the surface. But she held it together, focusing on the facts, hoping the officers would see through Karen's lies. When she finished, the officer nodded and asked her a few more clarifying questions, jotting down notes as Lily answered. Then it was Karen's turn. Lily sat back in her chair, trying to steady her breathing as Karen launched into her version of events. Her story was full of holes, contradictions, and outright lies, but the worst part was how confident she sounded as she spoke. Karen claimed that Lily had been the one who had taken the phone, that she had been aggressive and unreasonable, and that she had made Karen feel unsafe on the flight. She even went as far as to accuse Lily of trying to extort money from her by demanding the phone back. The more Karen spoke, the more disgusted Lily became. It was like listening to a performance, a carefully rehearsed act meant to manipulate the situation in her favor. Lily's fists clenched under the table, but she didn't react. She had to let Karen dig her own grave. She knew the truth, and deep down, she hoped the officers would be able to see through the act. But as Karen finished, Lily couldn't shake the feeling that things might not go the way she hoped. What if Karen had more influence than she realized? What if somehow her lies were more believable? After what seemed like an eternity, the officer who had been taking their statements left the room to confer with her colleagues. Lily sat in silence, her nerves fraying, her mind spinning with doubt. What if the officers didn't believe her? What if this whole thing ended with her losing not just the phone, but her dignity, her peace of mind? Karen, as usual, seemed unfazed. She was already making phone calls, chatting casually as though she were planning a weekend getaway, not standing in the middle of a criminal investigation. Lily couldn't understand it. How could she be so calm? Was she really that confident in her lies? Or was she so used to getting away with things like this that she didn't even care? Finally, the officer returned, her face grim. "We've taken your statements, and we're going to continue investigating," she said. "For now, we're going to hold on to both of your information. We'll need to contact your respective airlines for verification, and we'll need you both to stay in the area in case we need further clarification." Lily's heart sank. "So, what happens now?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The officer looked at her, her expression softening just a bit. "For now, you're free to go. But we'll be in touch once we've completed the investigation." Lily nodded, barely registering the words. She stood up slowly, her legs shaky from the tension of the past few hours. The officer handed her back her ID, and she walked out of the room, her mind still spinning. She had no idea what would happen next, no idea what the outcome of all this would be. But one thing was clear: she was in deeper than she had ever expected. This wasn't just about a stolen phone anymore. This was about something much bigger. The fight for her own sense of justice, her own integrity, and the truth. As she walked out of the police station, the weight of everything hit her at once. She had no idea how long this would drag on, but she knew one thing for sure. She wasn't going to back down. No matter how difficult, no matter how long this fight took, she was going to see it through. She couldn't let someone like Karen get away with what she had done. This was far from over. The days that followed felt like a blur for Lily. She tried to go back to her normal routine, returning to work, meeting up with friends, trying to keep her mind occupied. But everything felt different. Every time she looked at her phone, it was a reminder of the strange turn her life had taken. The police had said they would be in touch, but she hadn't heard anything, and with each passing day, a gnawing uncertainty grew inside her. Would they even find enough evidence to pursue the case? Or had Karen's lies been so convincing that Lily's truth would be lost in the shuffle? She tried to tell herself it didn't matter, that the most important thing was that she had stood up for herself. But deep down, she couldn't shake the feeling that everything was hanging in the balance. In the small town where she lived, whispers of the incident had already begun circulating. People had started to ask questions, some sympathetic, others not so much. There was always a group who would side with the underdog, but there were those who couldn't be bothered to get involved. Some of her colleagues at the library made pointed remarks, talking behind her back or questioning why she'd made such a big deal out of a simple misunderstanding. They didn't know what it felt like to have someone take something from you in broad daylight and deny you the right to reclaim it. No one had ever treated Lily like that before, and it stung more than she cared to admit. But she tried to push it aside, focusing on the few who had supported her, the ones who stood by her and told her she had done the right thing. It helped, but it wasn't enough to fully quiet the voice of doubt in her head. The worst part was the waiting. She had never been one to sit idle. Lily was used to being in control, to handling her problems head-on. But this situation had spun out of her control from the very beginning. And now she was at the mercy of a system that could take its sweet time. It wasn't like the movies. There were no dramatic showdowns or quick resolutions. She couldn't just expect everything to fall into place because she was the good guy. The truth didn't always win. Then, one afternoon, the phone rang. It was a number she didn't recognize, but when she picked it up, her heart skipped a beat. "Hello, is this Lily Thompson?" The voice on the other end asked, a man's voice, professional yet firm. "Yes, this is Lily," she replied, her throat dry. "This is Detective Jameson from the local precinct. We've completed our investigation into the incident you reported. I'm calling to inform you of the results." Lily's breath caught in her throat. She wasn't sure if she was ready to hear this. "And?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "We've managed to verify the details you provided, and after reviewing everything, flight records, witness statements, and the information from your phone, we've concluded that Karen did indeed steal your phone. She has a history of similar behavior, and we gathered enough evidence to proceed with charges." Lily sat back in her chair, stunned. It was like the weight of the world had just lifted from her shoulders. For a moment, she couldn't quite process what he had said. After all the stress, the uncertainty, the doubt, she had won. She had fought for what was right, and now the truth was finally coming to light. The detective continued, explaining that they would be filing charges for theft and fraud, and that Karen would likely face legal consequences for her actions. Lily felt a sense of vindication, but it was tempered by the realization of how much this situation had cost her. She had never wanted any of this to happen. All she wanted was her phone back, but now she had to deal with the fallout, the legal paperwork, the press attention, the potential for more drama in her life. Still, it felt like a small victory. Lily thanked the detective and hung up, sitting in stunned silence for a few moments. The phone was still in Karen's possession, but now there was hope that it would soon be returned. More than that, there was a sense of justice that had been denied her for so long. But the victory wasn't just about the phone. It was about everything that had happened over the past few weeks, the way Lily had stood up for herself in a situation where most people would have stayed silent, the way she had refused to let someone take what was rightfully hers. It was about reclaiming her voice, her confidence, and her self-respect. She had been forced into an extraordinary situation, but in the end, she had come out stronger. It wasn't easy. The process had taken a toll on her emotionally, and even now, Lily was still reeling from the strain it had placed on her life. She had to face the uncomfortable reality that people she once trusted had judged her, that some had sided with Karen without even knowing the full story. There would always be people who couldn't see the truth, who didn't understand the need to stand up for yourself in situations like this. But that wasn't her problem anymore. The community's reaction was mixed, as expected. Some praised her for taking a stand, while others whispered that she had made too much of a trivial incident. But Lily didn't care anymore. She had proven to herself that she could fight back, that she could take control of a situation that seemed impossible. She had learned more about her own strength in those weeks than she ever had before. She was no longer the shy, quiet librarian who let things slide. She had become someone who demanded respect, who refused to let anyone walk all over her. Karen, on the other hand, was facing the consequences of her actions. As Lily watched the news and saw the reports of Karen's past, it became clear that this wasn't the first time she had used manipulation and lies to get what she wanted. But this time, Karen hadn't won. And that knowledge brought Lily a sense of closure. She didn't need Karen's apology. She didn't need anyone to tell her she was right. She had known from the beginning what the truth was. And now, she had the validation she needed. Months later, as life began to return to a semblance of normalcy, Lily reflected on how the experience had changed her. She had become more confident, more assertive. She no longer feared confrontation, because she knew that standing up for herself was not only possible, it was necessary. She had learned that sometimes the hardest battles were the ones you fought for yourself. And in the end, those were the battles that made you who you were meant to be. One evening, as Lily sat on the porch with a cup of tea, watching the sunset and reflecting on the ordeal, she realized something profound. This entire experience had been about more than just a phone or a thief. It had been about reclaiming her own life. And she had done it. As the last rays of the sun dipped below the horizon, Lily smiled to herself. She was stronger now, and she knew she would never let anyone take what was rightfully hers again. The phone call, the confrontation, the legal battles, they had all led to this moment. The struggle had been worth it. And though the scars of the experience would linger, Lily knew she was forever changed, for the better.